Good day. I am George Herbert Mead, American philosopher, social psychologist, and one of the foundational figures in the development of symbolic interactionism. Often called the father of social psychology and a key voice in American pragmatism, I devoted my life to understanding how the self arises, not in isolation, but through active, ongoing interaction with others. My work laid the intellectual foundations for how we understand meaning, identity, and communication in everyday life. Welcome to Socio-Exploration. In this video, I'll guide you through the journey of my life and share my core contributions to sociology, especially how meaning, identity, and consciousness are shaped through social interaction. I was born on February 27, 1863 in South Hadley, Massachusetts, into a family dedicated to faith and learning. My father, Herbert Mead, was a Congregationalist minister and later a professor of theology, while my mother, Elizabeth, was a passionate educator who served as president of Mount Holyoke College. After graduating from Oberlin College in 1883, I pursued philosophy and psychology at Harvard University, where the ideas of William James and the emerging pragmatist movement deeply influenced me. My thirst for knowledge led me to Leipzig and Berlin, where I studied under Wilhelm Wundt, further fueling my fascination with psychology, experimental science, and human consciousness. In 1891, I married Helen Kingsbury Castle, a fellow Oberlin graduate from a distinguished Hawaiian missionary family. Helen was a gifted writer and intellectual, and our marriage was a partnership built on mutual respect and shared ideals. We welcomed our son, Henry Castle Mead, in 1892. He later pursued a career in medicine and public health, carrying forward our family's commitment to social responsibility. In 1894, I accepted a position at the University of Chicago, where I would spend the rest of my career. It was here, within the intellectually vibrant Chicago School, that my most influential ideas about the self, society, and meaning took shape. Though I never published a major work in my lifetime, my lectures inspired countless students, and thinkers like Herbert Bloomer preserved my ideas in posthumous publications. Despite my public role as a teacher, I was a private man, remembered by those close to me for my compassion, gentle humor, and belief in the potential goodness of humanity. I passed away on April 26, 1931 in Chicago. Though my grave is modest, my influence endures, shaping the fields of sociology, psychology, and philosophy to this day. As George Herbert Mead, I did not write books in my lifetime, yet I spent decades speaking, thinking, and teaching about the very essence of what it means to be human in a social world. What I offered were not just ideas, but frameworks, ways of seeing how the self, the mind, and society are not separate, but woven together in our daily interactions. Let me now walk you through my central theories, as I have taught them to generations of students from the lecture halls of the University of Chicago. 1. The self as a social process. Many assume we are born with a self, as if it were an organ or a soul handed to us at birth. I respectfully disagreed. I argued, instead, that the self is not innate, it is acquired. It is something that arises from experience, and more importantly, from social experience. In the beginning, the infant knows only impulse, crying, reaching, hungering. But as the child grows, they begin to interact. They imitate. They play. They put themselves in others' shoes. In doing so, they begin to see themselves from the outside, just as others see them. This is when the self is born. A self only exists when one becomes an object to oneself. To become an object to oneself is to take the role of another, to reflect, to anticipate, to evaluate. Without society, such reflection is impossible. 2. The I and the me. Once the self begins to form, it is never static. It has two parts in constant dialogue. The me is the internalized attitude of the community, the structured habitual side. It is how society lives within us, our manners, our obligations, our roles. The I is the spontaneous creative response to the me. It is freedom. It is initiative. It is what we add to what society expects of us. Let me offer an example. You are a teacher. The me knows your duties, explaining ideas, grading papers, keeping discipline. But one day a student challenges your method. You pause. Something fresh stirs. You improvise a new way to explain the concept. That spark, that is the I. The I gives birth to novelty. The me gives form to order. Together, they create personality. 3. Symbolic interaction, meaning through shared symbols. What makes us human is not just that we act, but that our actions mean something. Dogs bark, bees buzz, but only humans say, "Good morning," or "I love you," and understand those as shared symbols that stand for deeper realities. I called this process symbolic interaction. Symbols are the tools by which we communicate our inner worlds. Language, especially, is the highest form of symbolic interaction. Through words, we share not only facts but feelings, values, and futures. We do not simply use language, we become selves through language. Without shared symbols, there would be no cooperation, no education, no morality, no society. 4. The social act and the gesture, response chain. In daily life, every interaction is made up of gestures, acts we perform that call out a response in others. Imagine I raise my hand to hail a cab. That gesture has no meaning by itself, but the cab driver, recognizing it, stops. The gesture becomes significant because it is understood and responded to in a shared way. This is what I called a social act, not an individual behavior, but a coordinated sequence of gestures between people. In conversation, the same applies. I speak, you listen. You reply, I listen. This back and forth is how society moves and grows, not through laws or force alone, but through the subtle rhythm of mutual understanding. 5. The generalized other. As children, we learn to see ourselves through the eyes of specific others, parents, friends, teachers. But as we grow, we begin to recognize a wider gaze, a collective perspective I called the generalized other. It is society's shared expectations. It is the moral compass of the community. It is the voice in our head that asks, what will people think? Or more nobly, is this right? To have a self is to be able to take the attitude of the generalized other. This is what enables moral reasoning, ethical action, and civic responsibility. Without the generalized other, we may remain trapped in ego or impulse. With it, we become participants in humanity. 6. The mind as an internal conversation. I viewed the mind not as a hidden chamber of secrets, but as a social process turned inward. When you think, you are essentially having a conversation with yourself, a conversation built from the gestures, words, and responses of others you have encountered. That is why even solitary thinking is profoundly social. Our inner life is shaped by every dialogue, every reprimand, every encouragement we've received from others. To put it simply, we learn to think because we learn to talk. 7. The philosophy of the present, emergence and creativity. In my later years, I reflected deeply on time and novelty. I argued that the present is not merely a result of the past, it is a creative moment. A place where something new can emerge, something not fully determined by what came before. In every social interaction, there is the potential for surprise, for change, for becoming. Reality is in the process of continual becoming. Thus, society is not a finished structure. It is an open process, one we are all helping to shape. Although I never published a major book during my lifetime, I gave thousands of lectures and essays that conveyed my philosophy of the self, society, and symbolic interaction. I preferred the spoken word, the dynamic exchange between teacher and student. But after my passing in 1931, my students, especially Charles W. Morris, gathered my lectures and writings and published them with great care. These are the most important among them. 1. Mind, Self, and Society, 1934. This volume is the truest expression of my life's teaching. It was compiled from my classroom lectures by my student and editor Charles W. Morris and published 3 years after my death. In it, I explain how the mind and self develop through symbolic interaction, how language, gestures, and social roles give rise to human consciousness. This is where I outline my theory of the I and the me, the generalized other, and the concept of the social self. The self arises when the individual becomes an object to himself. This work laid the foundation for the field of symbolic interactionism and continues to shape how we understand identity, meaning, and society. 2. The Philosophy of the Act, 1938. Edited by Morris from my manuscripts and unfinished essays, The Philosophy of the Act dives deeper into the nature of action, gesture, and response. Here, I propose that human knowledge and experience are rooted in doing, in how we engage the world through our bodies and tools. I argue that meaning emerges in the act itself, not just from abstract thought. The book examines how the gesture becomes a significant symbol when others respond to it in expected ways. This is the heart of communication and the birth of shared meaning. 3. The Philosophy of the Present, 1932. This work, based on a series of lectures I gave shortly before my death, was edited and published by Arthur E. Murphy. In The Philosophy of the Present, I explored the nature of time, emergence, and creativity. I challenged the idea that the future is a mere extension of the past. Instead, I believe the present is a place of novelty, where new meanings, actions, and identities can emerge. The present is not just a point in time, it is the arena in which reality becomes. This was my philosophical statement on process, becoming, and the creative potential of each moment in social life. 4. Movements of Thought in the 19th Century, 1936. This book, also edited posthumously by Charles Morris, brings together a series of my historical lectures tracing the major philosophical, scientific, and social currents of the 1800s. I discussed thinkers such as Kant, Hegel, Darwin, and Comte, and reflected on how their ideas influenced the modern conception of self and society. This volume shows me not just as a social psychologist, but as a historian of thought, someone deeply engaged with the evolution of Western philosophy. 5. Selected Writings. George Herbert Mead, 1964, Edian, Andrew J. Reck. This later volume is a collection of key essays, some previously unpublished, that reflects the breadth of my thinking across philosophy, psychology, and education. It includes writings on the act, the self, the individual, and the social, and the moral implications of symbolic interaction. Though I did not prepare this book myself, it captures my enduring voice, thoughtful, rigorous, and always committed to understanding how society makes us, and how we, in turn, make society. My life's work was animated by one core belief, that the individual and society create each other. There is no self without society, but there is no society without selves acting, reacting, imagining, resisting, and transforming. I believed we must study human life not by dissecting people in isolation, but by understanding the web of interaction that binds us together and gives us meaning. Do like, subscribe, and click the bell icon for further notifications. Thank you, and have a great day.